They say that there are two different kinds of people: Star Trek people and Star Wars people. That does seem to be the case. I have rarely met anybody who is a giant fan of one franchise and loves the other one equally. They might enjoy the other one, but it's not the same to them. I am one such person. Star Wars is my jam. That's just what I grew up on. Star Trek, they didn't really do that I ever saw, at least on TV. They didn't do reruns when I was a kid, so I never saw it growing up. So I don't really have nostalgic feelings about Star Trek. I've still never seen the entirety of the original series all the way through. I've seen a lot of episodes now, but I've not watched it like in its totality. Actually, the only show that I've ever watched in its totality is Deep Space Nine, which I watched as an adult and really enjoyed. The Star Trek movies are different, though. I do like the Star Trek movies. I'm not a giant fan of the Next Gen crew, so I'm not a giant fan of those four movies. I do like the newer movies. They're not. I think the Star Trek 2009 and especially Star Trek Beyond. Star Trek Beyond's a great movie. I love Star Trek Beyond. '09 is a very good soft reboot. Into Darkness is a little bit up its own ass. But overall, I think those movies are fun. In a Star Wars-y kind of way. They're not necessarily Star Trek. That's what I hear about Discovery and Picard, too. That they are more akin to Star Wars. In that they are less about the sort of philosophical debate about things and more about the action. But the movies, the original cast movies, I think all six of them do a great job at balancing that. So today I'm going to talk about my favorite of the original six, Star Trek, not the Final Frontier, Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country. The Final Frontier just sounds like it should have been the last one. Thank God it wasn't, because Star Trek 6 is my favorite. I don't mind Star Trek 5. Everybody hates Star Trek 5. It's not great, but it's fine. But Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country, the sixth part of this franchise, I think is phenomenal. I think it's great. I think it is the one movie in the series to really nail down the politics and the philosophy that the original series is so beloved for, and to actually bring to a satisfying conclusion the arc from the TV show through the movies to Undiscovered Country. Forget Star Trek Generations. You don't need it. The Enterprise crew is tasked with having a peace summit with the Klingons. The Federation and the Klingons, they're finally settling their differences. They're finally putting aside the squabbles that they've been having for decades, possibly centuries. Again, I don't know the show that well. But the Enterprise is tasked to have this honor of having this historic moment for the galaxy. But Kirk is a racist. Remember, Klingons killed his son, or a Klingon killed his son, and he's had all of these encounters, always bad, with Klingons. He doesn't trust them. He's not a fan of the peace agreement. And he is not the only one. He is set up to look like he orchestrated the assassination of the Klingon ambassador. And he and McCoy, who is accused of not doing all he could as a doctor to save the Klingon ambassador, they are sent to a Klingon prison. And it is up to Spock and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise to prove their innocence and save them from certain doom. This movie came out really as the Cold War was winding down. So the analogy of Klingons, Soviet Union, and the Federation, the United States, having this sort of tenuous peace summit and saying, okay, we're gonna stop aggression, is it really works. It really resonates, especially if you know what they're doing. If you're like a kid now and you're watching Star Trek 6, you might just think it's a story that has no relevance to the real world. But it really did. It really was about this moment in reality. And they did it in such a way where it didn't beat you over the head with it. The Star Trek movies, I have an interesting history with them. My mother worked at Sears. And Sears did a promotion for Star Trek V when it came out. My mother worked in the TV department. And so, because she worked in the TV department and because they were selling all of the movies on VHS, my mother made me bootleg tapes of the movies. She said he likes Star Wars. I'm sure he'll like Star Trek. So I sat down and I watched these movies. And a 9-year-old is not going to sit there and enjoy Star Trek the Motion Picture. He's just not. I can appreciate it for what it is now, but at 9 years old, I was bored out of my mind. And I think I got kind of into Star Trek 4. I liked that well enough. But they just didn't grab me. They weren't Star Wars. I wanted the Force. I wanted lightsabers. I wanted Jedi and Sith and I think the more religious aspects, if you will, of Star Wars. They're two different kind of philosophies. Star Wars has a religious tone to it. Star Trek is intellect and using your power of reason to negotiate your way into a better world, to create a better world using what we actually have. Star Wars is about the Force and needing special powers in order to fight your way to a better universe. And again, this is just sort of the sort of spiritual side of it maybe pulls me a little bit more. And again, this could entirely be if I as a kid had a dad who was really into Star Trek and I sat there and watched every episode with him and he took me to the movies when they came out and everything, I'd be a Star Trek guy. I didn't have that. I had Star Wars. I had the action figures. I, watched the movies on VHS over and over and over again. That makes me a Star Wars person. Trek, though, while not a franchise that I obsess over or anything, I'm always interested when there's a new installment. I haven't been lately. Just the shows they have on now, they just don't appeal to me. I don't have CBS All Access anyway, and those shows do not appeal to me enough to get CBS All Access. And like I said, the different iterations of Star Trek, not all of them worked for me. People love Next Gen. To a lot of Trek fans, Next Gen is it. That's the best example of Star Trek. I just never got into it. It was a little bit too cerebral. too slow. It just didn't. It didn't get me. It just didn't get its hooks into me in a way that I was ever able to really find my in with it. Deep Space Nine was more of like Star Trek in the Wild West, almost this sort of frontier story. I liked that. I identified with that. And then like I said, the newer movies, they're like Star Wars. They're fast and there's laser fights and you know, I like that. I gravitate towards that kind of space action. Star Trek 6 doesn't really have that. Star Trek 6 is a very cerebral movie, but in a different way. It's playing around with the history of the franchise. And in doing so, it has a rich lore to it that even if I'm not completely familiar with all of it, I can feel the weight of it. I can feel the weight of Kirk grappling with finding a way to be okay with Klingons. I find that interesting. I think it's great. Star Trek 6 is not the one everybody goes to. Everybody goes to Star Trek 2. If you don't go to Star Trek 2, you go to Star Trek 4. Those are the ones that everybody sort of gravitates towards as the best of those movies. But I say it's Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, and I would give that 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think that it's a movie you can enjoy even if you're not necessarily a Trek fan. If you just have sort of a cursory knowledge of Star Trek, I'd say this is the one that you can watch and get the most invested in, and really the one that is the most accessible to fans that don't know everything about Star Trek.
Their worlds. Sort of gave myself the challenge of, okay,